you considered the messages your outfits send? What do you think your clothes say about you? See, style is about the clothes, but it's not really about the clothes. Every day you make choices about what you're going to wear, but what are you communicating? Welcome to Above and Beyond Style. I'm your host, Maria DiLorenzo, and in 2019, I founded MFD Style, where I provide a unique, intuitive approach to personal styling for those ready to embrace a more meaningful look. With this podcast, I'll uncover key elements of where spirituality, psychology, and style intersect, revealing how you can make intentional wardrobe choices that reflect who you really are. So let me ask you, are you ready to transform into your authentic self? Then it's time. Come with me on this journey, and together, we'll take your style above and beyond style. Welcome back, everybody, to Above and Beyond Style. Again, this is season 4, where we are talking about change, transition, all these different things that are happening in life. And what's been so wonderful so far this season is the ability to really talk about it with my conversation partner, Dr. Melissa Carrick. Missy, welcome back to the podcast this week.
Thank you so much. Always great to be here.
And we are so lucky because not only is it that you and I get to speak this week, but we have an additional special guest who also happens to be connected to both of us. We get to welcome Zeke Phillips, who is Missy's husband, but also a former style client of mine and happens to be a second-generation entrepreneur, much like yourself, Missy. So Zeke, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Maria. Very excited to be here today.
So grateful to you both because this conversation in particular feels really fun so that we can talk a little bit more in the entrepreneurial space, but also, and I'm just going to put in a little sidebar here, that you both are surfers. So this whole concept of riding the wave of change can really be even deepened, I think, because now I've got two voices that can back up this metaphor. But I wanted to start today really talking about this concept that both of you are second generation entrepreneurs, which I find really interesting, who work together, who currently work together in your business. And you come from families where your parents both worked together as entrepreneurs. Now, this was not a construct that was really familiar to me. So when I learned this little fun fact, I thought it would be fun to have you both reflect a little bit on that first so that we could hear how that came to be and maybe informs how you're doing your business now. So Missy, would you like to begin and start?
For sure. Yeah, it's so unusual to have parents that work together. We get that question all the time. We get that question as a couple when people realize, whoa, you work together? How do you spend that much time together? Is often the first question. And we don't actually spend that much time together when we're working because it does require a division of labor. And where we come together is especially in the synergy of planning a business, mapping it out, visioning, or looking at, well, what's actually going on? How do we want to pivot? Or when those waves of change come at us, how do we work as a team? And in a lot of ways, I stand on the shoulders of my parents doing that and very grateful to have that. Learning what to do, having maybe a leg up in that, and also learning what not to do as a couple who works together. So it's been fantastic. And in some ways, it's hard to envision anything else, seeing that model for my entire life.
Now, our listeners already know that your father is a chiropractor.
Yes.
And so in that business, your parents work together.
Yes. My dad had a number of staff over the years, had, big staff, small staff, depending on what was going on in the practice. And my mom really ran the business part of it and ran the practice, like that practice part of it.
Love it. Zeke, how about you?
Well, it is, I want to echo a little bit about what Missy said. I mean, it never even occurred to me that I couldn't do this. I also happen to have a sister who is self-employed, works with her husband as well. And, the thing that comes to mind right away is that the power of two different creative energies, the power of two different voices. And, I am immediately brought back to a quote my dad gave me one time. We were talking about, the power of being in partnership and the drawbacks of being in partnership, frankly. And he said, well, your mother and I, sometimes she would be having a hard time and, I would pick up the slack. Other times I would be having a hard time. And luckily, there was never a time where both of us were crazy at the same time. And I feel like that's really the magic of our partnership, is that, there are times when one of us can see the vision and the other one is struggling with it. Or when, one of us has a really strong sense of what to do or not to do. And I feel like we really work together, in synthesis that way and in creative energy that way that really works.
I love that. And just so our listeners can know a little bit about what your parents did, what was their, business?
Well, it's interesting because my mom started out with, you could call like a high-end junk store. She would resell things, antiques, some just quirky pieces that she knew that she could find value in. And my dad had the hots for her, so he was just hanging out, trying to get to know her better, and got involved, see where he could help out. And then that evolved into a pretty successful run in the fine antiques business. They traveled all around the country exhibiting, and that was my childhood. My parents were around most of the time, and then occasionally we would have a family member or babysitter come, and they would go off to Chicago, or they would go to New Orleans or New York City and exhibit for 5 to 10 days. And then my mom actually started a retail business in the early 90s. And it happened to be in the same location where her first store was in the 60s. So like 25 years later, she rented the same spot. My mom is just very, very much like Missy. My mom gets bored easily. She needs action. She needs to be, moving. She needs to be really engaged. And one of the things I want to talk about is my parents had made this choice to take summers off. So after a while, she was like, I've had enough taking time off. It's time to do something new. And so she started this retail business, which then phased them out of the antiques business. And now it's still going, I guess, over 30 years later.
Wow. I love that you both have had such exposure to these different models or approaches to doing business, and being able to get creative with your time, your pace, your lifestyle. This was definitely one of the things that I did not grow up with, but it was something that I kind of evolved into and discovered about entrepreneurism, and something that I think really appealed to me. And being able to live that sort of pace and lifestyle as you need to join in partnership as you need to be able to, leverage different people's strengths at the right time. All of that feels really important to anyone who might be thinking about entrepreneurism, or if you're in the thick of it. I appreciate knowing that about your story, because I think that also adds to kind of where we're headed in this episode. But I think this concept of the couple that works together, I appreciate what you said. It's unique. It has its own, I'm sure, pros and con moments, but it does add to the richness of this conversation that we want to have, obviously, around change and style. I will just ask kind of off the cuff here that, Missy, you took a sabbatical for the last 3 to 4 months as we are recording this, and are back in practice now. And I'm curious, I'm going to pitch this question over to Zeke about, how was the sabbatical for you? How did you find taking this time, kind of this pause in your business? Because as a joint partner, we obviously have heard a little bit about Missy's piece of that story. I'd love to just get a little reflective moment from you about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, first of all, it's amazing how much there is to do when you have all the time to do it. One of the things about being self-employed and running a household, or, a lot of people have children while they're trying to do this, there is almost a triage method where you're trying to figure out what is most critical, what needs to be done first, what could be put off, what demands attention right away. Yeah. And I was struck immediately by how much there was to do when there is all this time to do it. The other thing that we discovered is there were opportunities to have some continuity while we were on break through some other services that we were providing, offering nutrition sales, for example. And that, understanding that if we were to take a break again, having those opportunities to really keep other sources of income coming, as well as like providing value for our client base. So that was really kind of the two big things that I took away from it.
And Missy, I don't know that we ever asked you, as you've returned back to practice, did you feel like you got what you needed or wanted out of the sabbatical in this moment, right? That it could evolve, I imagine, but did you get what you wanted?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. It's so interesting because you referenced this. I think the sabbatical process is still working on me, and the fruits of that are still evolving and showing up. It's still very much in process. And I got a lot of what I wanted. And like many things, we have an idea of what we want, and we get some of that, and then we get something different. So for me, I spun out a little bit in the beginning of sabbatical, being used to going so fast paced, doing so many things, and then realizing that I actually needed rest. And I knew some of what I wanted from sabbatical was rest, but I did get a chance to get that deep rest and that rest over time. So it's not like a long weekend away. It took me a while to plow through a bunch of projects. Of course, I took an advanced meditation training. I took a course on finance. I took some other courses. I visited family. I did all these things. And then finally went, oh, wait, I have to surrender to this process. I did get some clarity on the direction of my practice, but much like style, much like a closet, it was more of an edit of, I definitely don't want this. Or in your process, there's a way of, I don't want to give away your secrets, but it's a way of going, these are the definite no's that I can no longer have in my practice, or this doesn't work for me. Working a 9 to 10 hour day, that no longer works for me. That's not going to happen. And starting back very slowly, they're still evolving. That's partly why I went back into practice and didn't continue sabbaticals, because I realized I could not make decisions in a vacuum and needed to actually get, no pun intended, my hands on people, get in the environment and feel into, okay, what works, what doesn't work. Okay, working this long of a shift doesn't work. Well, what does work? And it's interesting. That's the process. Without the rest, I would be unable to do that process and actually check in with myself. So essentially, the biggest gift or the biggest fruit was being reconnected with myself.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's always important, much like we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, that some of the power of this season was that we were in the middle of change, and talking to people who are in the middle of change, I think, is sometimes richer than talking to the people who have like done it or on the other side. So they're always sort of reflecting back to lessons and things. And those are wonderful. But I think there's something particularly poignant about talking to someone in the middle of it and kind of unearthing all the things that are happening at that moment.
It's been so great to have you as a dialogue partner through this, because certainly anyone who's been through it, or I have a buddy who made a big career change, and he went through it and, it's easy. It's, you can totally do this.
Right.
I took time off and this is what I did. And that's easy. But when you're in the midst of it, it's like, whoa, this is daunting. And you can't see where you've been until you're through it.
Yeah,
so,
I think
so appreciative.
I had a therapist once tell me that there's like a healthy state of denial. Like you have a healthy ability of just like forgetting some stuff in order to kind of keep going forward. And I think some of that is true. Anytime I've talked to entrepreneurs in particular who are kind of on the other side of success, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that they sort of gloss over the years where it could be tricky, or there's some learning curves, or maybe you make a mistake and had to pivot, or so all those things feel really rich and important to someone like me who is relatively new to entrepreneurism, to hear and to know that, well, one, to normalize it, but also two, to know that people can figure it out and move through it and get to a place where they've come, to fruition. And so that for me has always been an interesting point of this conversation. And one of the reasons I wanted both of you in the conversation today, as we're talking about entrepreneurship, but remember also talking a little bit about style and that concept of change and the things that we do and the choices we make about entering into change. And I had a friend recently say to me, or just ask out of curiosity and true compassion, I think, about like how my business was going. And it was an interesting moment for me to reflect back because, again, I'm in this midst of change. I've sold my home. I'm in kind of influx with what my next place will be. And I had to make an active and very conscious choice about my business, taking a little bit of a pause, scaling a little bit back so that I had the headspace and the time to travel and to do a few things to test out different places where I might live. And so when my friend asked me about this, I had to think about, well, I wonder what measure of success he might be looking for in my response. And I think traditionally, most people might look at that and say, well, did you get an increase in clients? Did you make more revenue? Did you have more social media presence? Were you churning out more content, more newsletters, like all of those kind of, I would call standard or traditional metrics for success? Or was he asking kind of that deeper question about the health of my business? And it was interesting for me to be able to say to myself first and then to him that no, my business was not growing in numbers. My revenue was not growing. And I had made these active choices to sort of scale back a little bit so that I could do this other work about my life and my lifestyle. But yet I felt really passionately that my business was in fact growing because I was growing. I was doing the work of figuring out and tending to myself and deepening my spiritual practices and all of these other measures of health and growth within myself, which I have to believe inevitably will impact and have a parallel sort of experience with my business. And it was interesting for me to think about this measure of success and how would I tell people that, like, yeah, my business is successful, and yet those traditional measures were not showing that. So I wanted to talk to you both today a little bit about this concept around success, because I think it's important for particularly a newer entrepreneur to understand and know, like, sometimes these non-traditional ways or metrics are really important to know and to pay attention to. So when you hear me talk about that story, and perhaps you have other matrices of success for yourself that you could share about your own business practice. So Missy, I'm going to ask for you to go first on that.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I just love this topic in so many ways, especially because Zeke and I both had models that were very successful and various degrees of traditional ways. Yeah. And I would say my parents did not necessarily do things traditionally, even in terms of choosing a traditional career. But when I look at my own success and I think about that, and I would consider myself to have a very successful practice. I do actually work with a business coach, and he's always like, yeah, you're very successful, which it helps to have someone externally sometimes say, yeah, this is not just in your head. So looking at that, it's interesting. When I started my practice, someone told me, start your practice as if you were already successful, which was such an interesting thing, because what it implies is, okay, the lifestyle design that you alluded to earlier, what would this look like? How would I do this? So it's interesting. We broke a lot of rules when we started the practice. And I had practiced with my dad for a year, but I moved to a new city and I started a practice not really knowing anyone. I did zero marketing. As a chiropractor, I had a second-story office, not in a highly trafficked area, with zero signage. None. Other than, the little movable letters outside. Yeah. So it was listed on that in a gorgeous building, and in a building that made me very happy because it got tons of natural light. Really beautiful. It did have some parking, even though it was in the city, but it just, the space felt right. So listening to what felt right for me, I also started my practice not ever working Fridays, because if I was already successful, why the heck would I work a Friday?
Yeah.
very non-traditional. And I didn't want to work late hours. We actually had a consultant come in early on, and she kept insisting that I needed to start office hours at 7:30 or 8 o'clock, because that's when working people could come in to get their appointments to see me. I thought, well, that's when I work out. And in order for me to be my best self and to grow and bring my best me to my practice, I need to make sure that I have breakfast in the morning and that I work out and I have time to get myself together. And that's even shifted a little bit more about what makes me function best. So there's always that element of checking in with success comes from the inside out. What does it look like for me to be successful? Now, I am still subject sometimes to those external metrics and thinking, oh, but convention says that, XYZ, whatever it is in your profession. I'm sure we can all relate to that in life. Whatever is the external metric of success, whether it's the car, the house, the watch, or maybe it's not material things.
Right.
And constantly checking myself with that. I will say I've been thinking a little bit more esoterically about this recently and looking at, okay, is success the amount of time I have to spend with the people that I love, to do the things that I love to do, and then to come back to my practice refreshed and restored? Or is success, it used to be, there was sort of, in my profession, there's a history of numbers of, okay, you can help more people. So if you're seeing more people, that means that you're successful. And certainly there's a dollar amount that translates to, or not for some people. But for me, if I'm packing everybody in, that's actually no longer a metric of success, because I'm not actually, I'm being with those people, but the amount of energy expended and the depletion that I experience, there's not a sustainability. So I start to look at the amount of time as well as the sustainability and the amount of joy that gives me. So joy has become a little bit more of the metric of success. And I will say, there's a woman that I was listening to recently, and she was saying the metric of success for her, it's along the line of joy, is if you think about that 5-year-old and what that 5-year-old you loves doing, like what did you love when you were 5? Who was that person that didn't have as much of the social constructs absorbed? It didn't know what success looked like. It's not when most kindergartners are not graded A, B, and C, so you don't have that standard. It was about play. And so really asking the question, how much did I play today in my work? And that doesn't mean how many waves did I ride or did I go and ride the waves? But it means even with my patients, did I play? Did I have fun? Or was I jaw set and concentrating hard and spending a lot of mental energy? So that's what I've got for right now. I could probably speak a lot more on success and the metrics of that. I have some ideas in terms of waves too, if you ever want to talk about waves and success as a surfer.
We'll get to that. Zeke, how about you?
I love this topic. First of all, it's a subject that I feel like is so underdeveloped within the realm of entrepreneurship, especially in the United States. I mean, there are other countries that do a much better job of prioritizing other aspects of life, which then lead to higher productivity. But in the US, we seem to just have this grinded out mentality. And the first thing that pops into my head, even as we were recording this episode, when I was a child, my parents made a decision that they were going to take the summers off. And this allowed me to basically go to school. When school was out, we literally went from our home in Baltimore County to the beach in Delaware, and we would spend the entire summer there. Now, my parents were not conventionally wealthy. I mean, they were just sort of standard middle class, maybe upper middle class at times, depending on the feast or famine of what was going on in their business. But that choice seemed to come from another place. It seemed to come from either a knowing or like a spiritual identity about what was truly important to them, what their values were. And as a result, there were times, my sister and I went to a private school when in elementary school, and there were times where they'd be calling them and being like, well, we know that tuition is due. It's not that we're not going to pay you, but we just need a bit more time. And, my parents were very, very transparent with me growing up. So like I knew that stuff. I knew what was going on. And it wasn't until my own adulthood, my own forays into starting a business with my love partner and business partner, where I started to really understand the impact of those decisions. And, my parents have always done things unconventional, and it never really occurred to me how powerful that was until I got into the space and saw like the lowest common denominator recommendations about how you're supposed to do it to be successful and all that kind of stuff. And again, I feel like we learn so much from where we come from, for better or for worse, but those lessons of just witnessing that it was possible really, really impacted me. And, of the two of us, I tend to be the one who's like, you know what, we can do anything if it works for us. And of course, there are limitations to that, although we've almost discovered that there aren't really, like in terms of like how many decisions we've made or tried out to see like, does this really work? And a couple things come to mind. Shout out to Tony Palermo, our business coach. He gave us this idea that really you can do business that is authentic to who you are, but really business is about fueling your lifestyle. And it's about having, the resources to be able to do what you want with your life. Yeah. And that's always really stuck with me because we witnessed right away that the more that we were happy in our life, the more productive we were in our work. And to the point where we would take time off to do seminars. We would take time off for vacations. We actually did a management program where they were saying you need to take 6 weeks off a year, which is crazy. Yeah. That's at least 3 times the average recommendation or the average, corporate allotment. And what we started to see is that overall, the more time we took off, the higher volume of sales we would have. And it was this counterintuitive thing, like how can we be doing better by working less? But I think the reality was we were more efficient when we were working. We were happier. We also created, just a bit of scarcity at times. So there was more of a sense of like, we need to get this while it's available. So I love this topic, and it's such a powerful thing, especially if you're creating a business that is about a passion that you have or a truth or some sort of transformation that has occurred in your life. That is your critical selling point. And to keep that going and nurturing who you are as you grow, as you continue to love people through your work, really demands that you take time to nurture that and not just grind all the way through. So those are my thoughts on it.
And if I can just even flesh out that a little bit more, one of my mentors, Dr. Scott Walker, had said, wow, you do a really great job of taking care of your best asset. Your best asset in business is you. And you take care, you do what you need to do to make sure that you are up. And you mentioned, okay, we took time off and we were doing better even in terms of our sales or the conventional business points that people measure. And knowing that that's not an airy-fairy, we didn't guess at that. We actually kept regular stats on our practice and saw it reflected. There was one year where we took 4 months. In 4 months, we took a week off every month. And it just was how it fell with either family events or vacation or seminars, and seeing that and going, whoa, we had a super, by conventional metrics, successful quarter. And it was wild to see that and go, okay, so the first metric of success and the primary metric of success is take care of your life, take care of you. Do that, what's going to make you happy. And I'm sure that can be taken to excess. And then it's like the primary purpose of business is to fuel your lifestyle and life, i.e. what makes you happy? What are you doing? And in some ways that may be a luxury. It's probably way different in terms of if you're working within a corporation. And I do believe there are principles that can be adopted from that into corporate life, different structure of work life, different structure of employment, and even into if you're working at home, or if you have a side hustle you're doing, or if you're the primary caregiver for your children. There's small things like, what's your metric for a successful day? Because it's very easy in the Instagram, Facebook culture to look outside of oneself and to say, okay, this is the measure of success that's conventional. You have XYZ and your children are always smiled, well-dressed, wearing matching outfits, whatever. And that is clearly successful. Oh man, my kid walked out of the house with wearing one striped sock and one polka dot sock, then I'm not successful. So
the other thing that just comes to mind for me is who we were when we were 32, starting this business from nothing, and who we are now in our mid-40s is a completely different set of concerns. And that I think that what bears to be seen is that sometimes when you have all this energy, you're way less discriminate on how you use it.
Sure.
And then as you, as you age a little bit, as you, have different priorities, your values shift a bit, that changes drastically. And no one talks about that really. Like they but that is a real concern. And it's something that we have noticed that we're just not willing to do. And I think a lot of people at this age kind of go one of two directions. They're either going down or they're putting the brakes on. And there's a lot of different terms for that, which could be, you're having a midlife crisis, but really you're just realizing that it's not a sustainable way of being in whatever pursuit you're in. And I think that we've always really valued that sense of mindfulness, using ourselves as conversation partners, checking in with what works and what doesn't work. That reflective component has always been a huge part of our marriage and by extension our business. What is this really working for us? And again, having that reflective partner who can see things, because I always have blind spots, she always has blind spots. We can't see ourselves, but we can help to see each other and nurture kind of where it's going.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so validated by so much of what you've said through this, because I don't know that I always had the language or the words for it, because when I started my business, I remember thinking, I want to work less, which is weird to start a business thinking that, because I had plenty of years, right, where I grinded and worked hard, and no regrets in that space, because it was a time of my life. It was a career path I was enjoying. I mean, all good, but it did have a cost. There was certainly an effect to that effort. And I remember thinking when I wanted to really go full time with my styling business, the beauty of being able to have that flexibility to call the shots, to take a break when you wanted to take a break, felt very important to me. And that I didn't want other people to dictate that. I wanted to be able to name that for myself, because I'm learning the older I get, I have a finite amount of energy, and I want to direct it in the ways that I can be for best use for myself and of service to the people that I work with. And that whole concept of, like, I always heard this, like, your people are your greatest asset, right? When you're in business, you want to take care of your people. And I think corporate America on some level really believes that, but the practice or the reality of that feels very lost. And so I felt like sometimes the only way I could really get to that space of me being my greatest asset is that I had to take this shot at entrepreneurism. And again, the successful measures were going to look a little different for me, because am I taking better care of myself? Am I able to show up with my clients in a better version of me than I was 2.5, 3 years ago? Yes. But again, those traditional measures of growth, and, I'm still only in the second, it's like 2.5 years in, and I'm still looking. I mean, I think it's hard to unlearn and like rewire those pathways that said, this is what makes you, this is how it shows that you're doing it right, or you're taking all the right advice. And I want to pick up on a thread you talked about. You have a business coach, and a lot of people, it's an interesting thing. I don't quite know what I'm going to make of it yet, but I've had quite a few people over the course of the last, let's say 18 months, have asked me about starting a business. And I think anytime you see somebody doing it, you sort of wonder, like, do they have the secret sauce? Like, what's the secret sauce? Can they tell me the secret sauce? Because I want to do what they did. And I think that's why business coaches have a niche, right? Like, that's why they can be successful, because they have practices and information and strategies and whatever that they can share that clearly work for people. So not minimizing that approach. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs that I've talked to have learned to use those resources strategically and to leverage different people's information or expertise to be able to help them make choices or move along in a particular way in their business. And I have a question underneath this, but I want to tell a story first. So in my first year, I made an intentional decision to hire a financial advisor to help me look at sort of the scope of the first year and what it might look like with this unpredictable income and how to kind of anticipate certain things. And for me, that was wildly helpful because finances and money are not really my forte. I wouldn't say I'm irresponsible, but I definitely don't enjoy spending time in that space. So to have someone help me kind of think through it from a strategy perspective and then really nail down to the numbers was really helpful, because then I didn't have to really worry about it alone. Like you said, Zeke, to have that partnership and have someone reflect back with you. And in this process of working with her, she made a recommendation for me to invest in a long-term disability insurance policy. And she talked about the importance of being a self-employed person, that if I were injured in some way, that I were unable to work, this would guarantee and assure that I would have income coming into my business or my life to help support me in whatever way I might need. And all logic at the time was like, well, of course. Who wouldn't do that? Because it's a major risk to go into a business for yourself and to potentially be injured or hurt so that you aren't able to earn money. And given that my work is very physical, that I was aware of like, gosh, yeah, if I only had to do this like via Zoom or over a conversation, would I be as impactful long term? So it brought up a lot of great questions. And I have to tell you, every time we talked about this topic, my body was like, nope. I get this like icky feeling in my belly. My head would hurt. I can remember my shoulders would feel really like heavy. And it took me a couple times in the conversation. We came back to it multiple times over the course of probably a month. And it got to an inflection point where I had to make a choice to either accept the policy or not. And I was on the call with this advisor and I told her, listen, I need you to hear me when I say I so respect your professional opinion and your expertise, because I too am someone that I'm hoping people hire me for my expertise and trust my recommendations. So I don't want that to be in any way minimizing what you're sharing and telling me. I believe you, but I can't accept this policy. I'm telling you, there's something in my physical body that's like, you don't need that. You don't need to spend. And I think at the time it was like $350 a month, which felt really high. And it was a significant chunk of money that I was like, did I want to do that? And it wasn't, I don't want to make it about the money because it really wasn't that. I can tell you very clearly that there was something else about it. And I don't actually really have the reason or the logic to share with you the why I said no. I just know that my body was like, this isn't right for you. And so I want to flip that question back to you about, have you ever had that happen where someone maybe made a recommendation and you turned it down, or you just had this knowing that like, I got to go a different direction than what standard traditional conventional lines are saying to do? Who wants to take that?
I mean, I can think of so many where even I feel like my life, just taking a sabbatical, as a healthcare provider, a 4-month sabbatical with no replacement, nobody coming in. And actually at the time, my sabbatical there was no time frame on it. It could have gone 6 months. It could have gone a year. But in my profession, no one takes that. But it was that gut knowing like, oh, I have to do this. And the cool thing, being supported by my business coach, being like, yeah, girl, it's time. You have to do this. You know that. It's just a matter of when, but you're going to do this. You've been talking about it. So that's an example of like the gut that went against conventional wisdom. But sure, I'd have to think about examples where it was a no, this is not for me. I'm not going to do this. But I'm sure there are a number of those kind of recommendations for sure. And even in terms of, I'm a cash provider, which means I do not take insurance. We will give people coding to file for insurance. And in my profession, that is unheard of, actually, or very rare. I think there's 5 of us in the whole state that do that. And my choice to do that, especially as someone starting a practice from scratch with 0 patients and saying, nope, I'm not going to do it. Because my gut said, not only do I not want the hassle and have to hire a staff and a coder that pays attention to that, but I think it actually came out of my commitment to, I want to spend my time, energy, resources, everything I have on patient care and not on playing the game. And yes, okay, it gives people more affordable care, but I can also say that it is pretty rare in my career where I've had someone say, oh, I can't do this because my insurance doesn't cover it. And in fact, I often see people who have gone through their insurance to get the care that they need, and something in that care was missing. And I don't say that to criticize any other provider, but more because it's like, oh, okay, we're going to actually look and say, here's I'm going to be really honest with someone. Say, here's what it's going to take. Here's your lifestyle change, or here's the piece, and it's going to take this long. And my integrity is intact. And I think there is something about, when someone's talking to you straight.
Yeah.
And when someone's talking to you for your gut. So it's worked out for me, but that was a very unconventional and by many people inadvisable thing to do, just like starting a practice with no signage. Now, I do have the advantage of having my dad, who had gone all cash, converted from insurance to cash, and some of his colleagues that were top-notch people in the field were all saying, yeah, you can totally do this. There's no need to do it a different way, which I do want to highlight that in this. You said something earlier, Maria, about like, how do you do this? And it is having, with that gut check, we always check it with ourselves. And it is nice to have conversation partners or colleagues to affirm, to run that by, and to just be like, yeah, you got this.
Yeah.
So that's what I got. You can probably think of some more salient points, Zeke.
As usual, I'm remembering a story from a friend of mine who was young, quite a bit younger than me, but some of the things he said just really stuck into my head. And he had actually come out. He had grown up in this like more traditional background. He had come out to his family, and he said, 2 things happen when you start telling the truth, or when you start living by your own truth. People either come closer to you or they move further away. And that translates into so many different applications. Like, people may understand your motivations or they may not. They may challenge your ideas or they may not. And the reality is we're all living in a projected reality and what we think is true and what other people think are true. And sometimes that can be so challenging to navigate. What is our truth? What is our integrity? What feels right for us? And we have such a strong developed sense of like the critical mind. Is this true? Is this false? Does this make sense? Does it not? And there are times, like you mentioned, your story illustrates the fact that sometimes you just know something. You don't know why you don't know how you got there, but you're embodying the truth in your cells. And I think that what has happened for us is there have definitely been some times along the way. I mean, honestly, there's been so many that it's probably overwhelming to even pick one out. But what eventually happens is that this muscle gets built for trusting. And I heard you say earlier, like you have a part on your keyboard, the trust key, and you're like clicking the trust key, trust. And that is so, I love that so much because, again, when you are self-employed and you are your greatest asset, your productivity in business is related to a huge amount of lifestyle factors that don't seem to be related to business, but absolutely are. And in your story, what I take out of your story is that you could not even be clear or think about anything until that decision was honored. And, being able to be fully present to what is part of a moment of your life or a task in your business, being able to fully show up for that you have to be present to what is your truth in this moment. And you can't step over things that don't work for you. But you will get so much support to do that, because it's very extraordinary to live your truth and not step over what doesn't work in business. And there are so many voices of people who are projecting their own reality of what's true and what's right for them onto you. And it can be at times really maddening. And we've had moments where we're looking at each other like, I hope this is the right thing to do, but I don't really know. And the reality is, like, we didn't know until we had experience with it.
Yeah.
And I think that also really leads to this idea that the only truth you really have is, what is your experience?
Yeah.
Like, is your experience that you absolutely have to have this? Sometimes you don't have enough information. Sometimes you don't have any experience. But by actually doing it and experiencing it, then you then have a truth to hold on to and a truth to build on.
Mm-hmm. It really speaks to that. I'm going to pull in the wave metaphor here, because it really is about that whole concept of, I don't know how this is going to go. There is a force and a rhythm and a power to this whole riding the wave that conceptually feels like this is a big risk, right? And in some ways, you're putting a lot out on the line, and you could be jeopardizing health or wellness. Who knows, right? Like, all the various factors that go into this choice of walking into something, or, paddling out in the ocean and trying this thing that is powerful and impactful. And you don't know how it's going to go. But that, I'm going to use that analogy about the trust key. Like, I really feel like the universe just keeps throwing that at me. Like, you just have to keep tapping the trust key here. This is how this works.
Well, and we continue to cultivate and build our faith, confidence, and belief in that trust key.
Of course.
Or in the water. You don't start out going and surfing like, even head-high waves. You start out in the white water. Yeah. You learn how your body works in the water. And so we forget that our life experience is what builds and informs our ability to trust at greater and greater. So you honoring your gut in that moment of like, I know you are smart and you have facts behind this to tell me. And we live in a fact-filled world where there's like, these are the steps.
Yeah.
This is the fact. This is the risk, calculated risk. And you had enough life experience to know, I have to honor this. And I think we build that muscle both by honoring it repeatedly. Yes. In big and little things. And we also, unfortunately, build that muscle by it not working out.
Of course.
We step over our gut. And there's been a number of things I can speak to in my own life where I've stepped over my gut, or at least temporarily stepped over my gut. So one of two things: I've stepped over it and had the repercussions happen, or I've continued to step over, and that voice gets louder and louder where I'm not honoring myself. And I don't even like admitting that.
Yeah, sure.
But that's how we learn. So that I can get to the point, if we're going back to the wave analogy of, wow, this is a risk. I don't really see, this wave is big and I'm going to go down the face of it. I don't really know how it's going to turn out, but there's the exhilarating moment where, again, it's I don't know that I love this expression, but it's like you pull the trigger, you commit, and you, okay, I'm going for it, and I'm going to see how this works out. And it can end in a blaze of inglorious glory where the wave detonates on you, or you can be in the perfect, we call it the grace pocket. And the grace pocket is the precise, it's like the wave and you are one, and you're moved by that energy, propelled along. It's exhilarating. When I'm by myself, when I'm surfing and that happens, I actually out loud like hoot and holler. And I can hear myself giggling and smiling, go, woo! Sometimes I just go screaming down the wave because you're in that grace pocket and you're carried along. Yeah. It's effortless. You had to make the initial commitment to go down that face of the wave, to intentionally stroke yourself in to the wave and take that risk to go into it. And by the way, if you employ the intellect and you hesitate for a moment because you employ the intellect, it's over. And actually, that's when you can get the most hurt and where you can go over the falls. And I can even think of a time surfing where I did that. I hesitated and I actually cracked some ribs. Because I went over the fall and I was not with the momentum of the wave. I instead got hit by the wave, hit by my board, and just pummeled. So it's this fine balance of all of our our study, our choices, our life experience informs that gut that says yes or that says no.
I love this for so many reasons because the application to style for me is right alongside this. And it's a smaller, perhaps more microcosm of what you're talking about when I am with clients and I'm able to ask them some of these questions around, could you try this? What might that feel like to try this? To get rid of this. Oftentimes it's in the editing process that this comes up the most because people have a lot of different attachments to their clothes for different reasons. And I really try to honor whatever those reasons might be, but I'm also there to challenge the reason and to help them think through and to feel through how it might be to let that go or to try something different. And I want to pose that question to you both because you've both been through the editing process with me. And again, it's not always about like the secret sauce of whatever I'm asking you, but I'm curious about your own ability to come to clarity about when like, okay, I got to tap the trust key here and I need to let go of some of this stuff and I need to be able to really like narrow in on the things I so love and get clearer about the wardrobe that you really want to wear and that to show up as your best self. So I'm just curious about that for each of you.
Oh my gosh, for sure. And I don't want to give away your secret sauce.
That's okay.
I will share. There's a couple of things. One, it's a very felt and embodied sense. And it's looking in the mirror as well as having someone yourself reflect back at me as well. You have me put on some things and just how I stood there. My sister always says, my sister Krista, she always says, stand like you like it. That's also like when I try something on, I'm like, ugh. And my posture changes, whereas I put something on. And my posture got much better. My face brightened. I found myself smiling. And it's just taking the moment to notice that. So you had me do that with a few items. And actually, we even put some in a pile for Krista because she has a radically different look. And it might be things that intellectually I love, i.e. I love all the flowy anthropology things. But on this body, this athletic, curvy body, that doesn't work. So we put those in the Krista pile.
Yeah.
And felt really good about it. And she loved them.
Yeah.
The other thing that was interesting is certain pieces where I was, but they have such utility. I wear these. I don't particularly love them, but they're part of my, what am I going to wear if I'm not wearing these in my regular rotation? You said, how about, you were so sweet, we just put these in the closet in the other room. Yeah. And if you go and get them from the closet, you can always go and have a little lifeline and go get them to wear them. But if you're finding you're not going to that other closet to pull them out, which reminds me, by the way, they're still hanging in the closet.
Yeah, of course they are.
So I can, the wisdom. So I'll put those in my get rid of pile right now, take them to consignment, because I haven't worn them all summer or spring, or in this fall, now that I'm even back in more full-time practice.
I like to call that wardrobe purgatory, where you got to put it in wardrobe purgatory for a period of time. And then if you go back to it, good for you. But I'd say 99% of the time, clients do not go back to it.
I call that the wardrobe safety net.
Yeah.
Because it really is the safety net of, okay, I'm pretty sure, but it's a different way of doing a gut check, of proving. And so now I'm starting to build the muscle where I can actually edit some things on my own, which has been fantastic. Thanks for that skill set, by the way.
You got it.
I'm struck by the ways that Missy and I are radically different.
Sure.
My solution to everything is to subtract usually, or edit, or throw away, or destroy. Just like anything to get to zero, please. Like blank space, nothing, that would be great. And Missy's idea of problem solving is more options.
Not quite.
In this comparison,
sure,
that's certainly what it is. So in some ways, the work, I had already done a lot of that work, and having that voice of reflection just made it so simple. It was just like, oh, that's definitely a no. All I need is that little tiny bit of like further encouragement to just know 100% that this is not right. And I tend to deal in more absolutes, which is not the best way to be, FYI. But it's just my comfort level of like, it either is or it isn't. And so that was awesome. I also feel like I'm struck by how little I actually need to really feel good in clothes.
Yeah.
And that I tend to reach for the same vibes depending on the season, the same kind of experiences, the same things. And some of them may be something new, or a newer piece grabs me, and then other times it's something I've had forever.
Yeah.
Or and for whatever reason it just has always stayed with me, or it's come in and out. And I love that. Like, the idea of utility to me is really an important thing, because I want, like, the style and the expression is very important, but I get overwhelmed by too many options.
Yeah.
And it becomes, like a movie theater where there's 8,000 movies playing at the same time. I'm like, oh my God, which one do I go to? It's just too much for me. So that was super helpful.
Yeah, and this speaks to the power of the edit, right? That anytime you're trying to get clarity, you have to remove a few things to get, like, kind of prune, right? And I think for a lot of people that can resonate with the quantity issue, because there are lots of folks who can stand in their closet and be like, I have so many clothes, but I wear probably 10% of them for lots of different reasons. But the edit helps them really narrow down and narrow in, and let go, right? To just let go of that stuff that someone else could use it. It has more life somewhere else. You deserve to be really more focused on what works for you in your lifestyle and in your wardrobe. And I always appreciate, I'm going to go back to that concept around trust, because again, when you hire someone, a service provider, you want to trust their opinion and their expertise. And I feel like I build trust well with clients, but it requires you, on the flip side, to trust yourself that you're making these choices. I'm never forcing people to do anything, right? I make recommendations, and I tell them candidly and very forcefully sometimes that this is what I think should happen, but you ultimately have the agency to do what you want to do. If you want to keep the thing I said to discard, that's okay. You still have that choice. But it's always about that trusting of, like, what do I really need? What works for me? And so to bring into the wave kind of concept for me, this is where the image is really powerful me, particularly in the style space, because when the wave comes in about what am I going to do, you get overwhelmed with perhaps too many options. Missy likes having the options and feels maybe that scarcity thing about, like, well, if I don't have that, then I have this, right? So there's lots of different mentalities that go on in the process. And so the wave can rise in lots of different ways. But the trust really comes into the choice about what is right for me. How am I going to get more clear about what do I need and what allows me to show up best? And so I'm going to weave all this back in, all the threads that we've just talked about around entrepreneurism, the risk taking, the measures of success, and the various metrics that it takes to know that for yourself. And the style, the wave, the surfing, all of it always somehow comes back to me about this inner knowing, the trust of the inner knowing. And I believe there is a partnership with this spiritual realm that you can name and identify however makes the most sense for you, but it's the partnership with that energy force entity that is helping guide you along, and that you are able to say, I don't exactly know how this is going to go, but I'm going to allow this to unfold as it's supposed to allow, and the timing it's supposed to unfold, and see what happens.
First of all, I just want to acknowledge, thank you for we're in Baltimore City, so we have some aircraft flying over. Thank you for that. Well, when I first heard that you were bringing surfing into this, I just was rubbing my hands together. It's because we have often found that it is the absolute perfect metaphor for every single thing in life. And what kind of stimulates my thought about it is that, when Missy and I are in the water together, we have radically different styles. I'm sort of like very intentional, methodical, slowly moving in, long, deep strokes. I sit out there and I wait. And I am like, I I am looking for the biggest and the best, and I want to get it for as long as humanly possible. And Missy goes out there, and the first wave that comes, she's on it. Like, blah, 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 blah. Like, she just has so much more quantity, so much more energy. She's like, this wave's coming. There might not be another one. Like, it's just like she has so much enthusiasm. And I look, and I'm sure we both look at each other, and in our minds, we're like, what is that person doing? Like, how could they let that? Why is she taking this one? Why is he sitting there doing nothing? How can he just sit there and wait? And somebody introduced the concept to me that you either have a stronger orientation towards the past or a stronger orientation towards the future. And I see that perfectly in here. And that it's not that one of us is right, but I'm sitting there knowing, based on my past experience, a big wave is going to come eventually. Mm-hmm. And I can't speak for her, maybe she can, but it's not that that's the right way to be. Like, the right way to be is just to go out there and experience and see what is. Yeah. And I am, applying the surfing metaphor to these conversations. What comes up for me is the idea that there's always going to be another wave. Yeah. And it may not be your best wave. Right. It may be a major wipeout. And, that's part of being a human being, is that we live in this realm of extreme risk all the time. We sort of act like it isn't there. We try to avoid it as much as possible, but it is there all the time. And you have these moments of exhilaration, triumph over it, and exhilarations where you're really humbled by it. Yeah. And, the magic is like not to get stuck in between the waves. The magic is like to realize that, like, it's just one wave. There's going to be another wave. You're going to be able to get over this one into the next one. The next one, for us, it's never about the significant things when it comes to surfing. It's about just being out there, showing up for the practice, having like a dumb small wave. And like the waves that we ride together are hilarious because we're just goofing off. Like, I'm trying to tackle her, or like... she might be like mooning me or something like that. Like,
it's my signature move.
Yeah, I mean, there's just surfing is such an interesting realm because some people take it really seriously and they are super macho, toxic, masculine, men and women. Doesn't matter. It's not just, they all take on this seriousness about it. But ultimately, it's this playful, joyful moment that happens like in a few seconds, and it's a lot of waiting, and then a few seconds, and a lot of waiting. But the magic that occurs in that moment is so transcendent that it transforms those who like really keep coming back to it. So I just love that you chose it. It's so cool. I could talk about it forever.
I love it. Missy, any thoughts?
Yeah, that's so well said in terms of the magic of surfing. And if I were to underscore what you said, apart from also... By the way, just point of clarification. Taking as many waves as possible, it's not because there's not going to be another wave. It's because I want to experience as much as possible. So it's like wave after wave, and the little wave, the big wave, the medium-sized wave, the choppy wave. I just want to experience it. And so that's like the motivating factor or the driving factor for me. And it is like future-oriented in terms of is there not going to be another wave, but like, oh my gosh, I just want to keep doing this. I just want to keep doing this. And that's what's pulling me forward. And the bottom line with all of this is it's like what you go out there to do and you're just experiencing it. So I remember your cousin Christina, who had started surfing later in life. And she said something to me about like, if I want to go out there and just paddle around and float on my surfboard, I'm still surfing. I'm out there. And so the point of that is get in the water. Yeah. You've used the word this episode, Maria, a lot, choosing. And it's like make the choice to actually get in the water. Yeah. Feel it, be it, wherever your realm of trust is, continue to build that muscle of trust. But in order to do that, you have to get in the water. You have to get on your surfboard. And maybe you're riding that wave on your belly. Maybe you're in the whitewater. Maybe you're in just the little tiny things, but you're there, you're in it, and you're experiencing the ocean and all its different facets. And more importantly, you're experiencing you in the ocean. Because you can look at the ocean and appreciate it and love it. And that is its own thing. But to really experience who you are in the ocean, that's how we build that trust of what works for us, what doesn't work for us. That's what builds that felt sense. And it is embodied felt sense, even if you're more intellectually oriented.
Yeah. You know, in our previous episode, we asked a question about the story you want to tell. And I just want to honor and say thank you to you both for sharing your story in such a powerful, clear way, because I think that helps me. I hope it helps you as the listener be able to connect to some of these metaphors and the themes. And just, I'm so grateful for the way that it all connects. So thank you for sharing the story. And I also want to pose a question for you listeners. If you've made it this far, I'm very proud of you, because this we know this has gone on, but we've had such rich things to talk about. So there's so much goodness in this. But my question back to you is about, where are you listening to the inner knowing? Where is that little nudge or the trust key getting tapped, or where's that happening for you? And is it in entrepreneurship? Is it in your life? Is it in your marriage? Is it with your kids? It can be in a million different places, but where's that happening? And if you use that muscle of continuing to notice it and kind of nurture it and play with it a little bit, I'm curious for you how strong it can get. And I'm doing that actively right now. So I'm not telling you I'm a master or guru at it, but I'm constantly revisiting that, like, how's that going? Where's that showing up? So for everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us today. Zeke and Missy, what a privilege and pleasure to have you on the podcast. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. It is so mutual.
Ditto. So much fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
I loved it. Maybe they'll be back again, you guys. Until next time, everybody, we'll catch you on the flip side. Thanks so much for listening today. If you enjoyed what you've heard, I would appreciate you taking the time to leave a review on the podcasting platform you're using, and share this episode with others who you think might really enjoy these conversations about personal style. For more information all about MFD Style services, you can find me on the web at mfdstyle.com, on Instagram at mfd_style, where I post almost 5 days a week, or send me an email at maria@mfdstyle.com. I also have a weekly email I send to subscribers, so I will include the link to that sign up in the show notes. So until next time, friends, remember to love yourself and then love yourself some more.